Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Chaitanyam Sarvagam Sarvam Sarvabhutaguhashayam Yat Sarva Vishayatitam Tasmai Sarva Vide Namaha. Om. Good to see you all. Welcome also to the many students regularly attending online. We continue our study of this wonderful text of Sri Shankara. Just a quick comment. I thought I had actually planned to abbreviate this chapter. It's quite long, and the text is quite long. So I've been taking, in prior chapters, whenever there was a long diversion into teachings of Vaisheshika or Bauddha Mata Buddhism, other topics that are not central to our process of self-inquiry, I've taken the liberty to exclude those for two reasons. One is Shankara tends to get quite technical in those discussions, and if you don't know in detail what is Vaisheshika Mata, then that discussion is going to be not helpful. And the second reason is, as I said, it's a long text. So I'd actually planned to cut down on this chapter. I couldn't. I think there were a few verses at the very beginning we excluded, but in a manner of speaking, I don't have the heart for it. Every verse is just wonderful. And from three different perspectives. If you're hearing it for the first time, Shravana. If you've heard it before, Manana, because you're now getting more clarity and you're hearing my comments, which will hopefully bring further clarity and dismiss any doubts you might have about it. And then finally, if you've really got it, it becomes nididhyasana, an opportunity for contemplation. So for that reason, I think to go through all the verses is actually wonderful. I'm not sure about the next chapter. Chapter 18 is, I think, 300 verses long. The longest chapter of the text. So I haven't started to edit the chapter yet or translate it yet. So we'll see when we get there. It's going to be a while before we get there because we are on verse 45, and the chapter goes on. We're about halfway through the chapter. So we'll see. All right. Let us pick up the thread. So, of course, it's atma-vichara, the main topic of this entire text, self-inquiry. And that expression is important because so many people have it in their mind that studying Vedanta is what we do here. And as I've said sarcastically many times in the past, if you're coming here to study Vedanta, you're wasting your time. And that's sarcastic, but I'm not saying it tongue-in-cheek. I'm serious. If you're coming here to study Vedanta, you're wasting your time. This is a process of self-inquiry. These teachings are meant to guide you on a process of self-inquiry. So if your attention is on the teachings of Vedanta, it's in the wrong place. Your attention should be on yourself, your true nature. Okay, and that's what we continue. And Shankara's typical style is he goes back and forth between Shruti and Yukti. Shruti, scripture, so he relies heavily on scripture, Upanishads in particular, and Yukti, reasoning. So he weaves his way back and forth, and we'll see that in this next verse. Mamaham chetyato vidya, mamaham chetyato vidya, shariradishvanatmasu, shariradishvanatmasu, atma-jnanena heya syat, atma-jnanena nena heya syad asura nam iti shrutehe asura nam iti shrutehe. In one verse. First half is yukti, second half is shruti. We'll see that. It says, mama aham cha iti, if you think aham and mama, I and mine, these very common conclusions, this is me, that's aham, or this body is mine, that's mama. This body is me, aham. This body is mine, mama. So ataha, because of this avidya, because of these wrong conceptions, you suffer. If this, by the way, I don't need to tell you that as we age, we're going to have an increasing number of problems with our bodies, and even our minds will continue to trouble us from time to time. Wherever there's identification, there's suffering. This is a basic principle of Vedanta. If you're identified with your body and mind, you will suffer. The metaphor I've given before is many people are identified with their cars. They really like, especially young people, you buy a particular car and it's a status symbol and something about that car is special. So there's identification with the car. And in fact, those are the cars in the shopping malls. Those are the cars that are parked about a half a mile away from those in the back row. So you have to hike to your car. And then suppose this young man, having parked his car across two spaces, in a half a mile away in the back row, as he's coming up to the car, he sees a new dent. It's like he got dented, not the car. Because of identification with the car becomes a source of suffering. If it's just a vehicle, then okay, if it's got a dent, you get it fixed. If it's got more of a dent, then that's why you have insurance and car repair places. It's just, my guru's expression was nice. He said, through Vedanta, you convert problems into situations. Very nicely said, very simple. And that's what happens when you when you negate this false identification. By negating false identification, all your problems are converted into situations. Situations means you still have to take care of it. If there's a problem with your body or mind, you still have to take care of it. But it's a situation and not a threatening problem. That's the point. So, this avidya, shariradishu, with regard to your body, mind, and senses, anatmasu, which are not I, this identification causes suffering. And the logic here is a little subtle because he is using, not surprisingly, a great Sanskritist will refer to grammar in making some arguments. So here the logic, I said yukti in this half and shruti in the next half. Here the logic is based on grammar. You use the pronouns I and mine. Now you use the pronoun I with regard to this body. Wait a minute, I thought I was first person, this was third person. Is this an I or is it a this? Make up your mind. Well, if you conclude it's an I, you've made a mistake that will cause suffering. If you say it's a this, you become free from that suffering. And so too with mama. Mama, mine, refers to a relationship. And this is a little bit more subtle. This is, you need a little bit of logic here. You can only have a relationship between like things. Like between two people can have a relationship. Can you have, I have to give a counterexample right now. Can you have a personal relationship with space. Doesn't make sense, right? Space isn't a physical thing that you can relate to, so there's no particular relationship between you and space, which means there's no problem. Have you ever been troubled by space? Well, that's the point. There's no mamatva. There's no my-ness with regard to space. There's no relationship possible. But look at this. If this is my body, then I can have problems. I can cause suffering. But Shankara's point here, which is a little more complex, this one, I is very simple. The mind is more complex because, like, space is something very different from you, so you can't have a relationship with it. From Shankara's point of view, you are pure consciousness, immaterial, vast, boundaryless, that so-called inner divinity. How do you have a relationship between immaterial consciousness and a material body? Logic. So using logic, Shankara dismisses any of this I and my business, so to speak, with regard to your physical body. Then second half, now yukti. He says, atma-jnanena heya syat. That ignorance, spoken about in the first half, heya is removed. Heya syat would be removed. How? Atma-jnanena, by knowledge of your true nature. Makes sense. If the suffering is due, again, my guru's words ring in my mind. If suffering is due to your failure to recognize your true nature as sat-chit-ananda, Atma, what he called self-non-recognition, if self-non-recognition is a problem, then which is a vidya, ignorance. Not ignorance in general, but ignorance of your true nature as sat-chit-ananda Atma. If that's a problem, then the solution, obviously, atma-jnana, self-recognition, to recognize your true nature. And he says that this is just as it was taught, asuranam iti shutehe. Shutehe, according to the scripture, asuranam. The problem of the asuras. And this is a reference to an amazing story in the Chandogya Upanishad. We saw this many years ago when we studied Chandogya here. It's rather a lengthy story. Let me give you the real brief story. It's also a little bit funny. Not that Upanishad stories tend to be funny, but this one does. So Indra was king of the gods, and Virochana, the head of the asuras, they meet up. And they're having, I don't know, meet up, it's like a meeting with Putin or something. I don't know. They have some discussion, and they're discussing spiritual knowledge. And it says, do you know what the spiritual knowledge is about? Do you know Atma? Do you know Brahman? And they both said, no, we don't. I don't know. They admit, I don't know. So they conclude we should go find out. So they go to the in the story, Prajapati or Brahmaji. Prajapati has an ashram in some celestial realm, and they go to Prajapati's ashram as students in this story, and they seek his instruction, and they stay there for many years. And finally, after many years, they're ready to understand. And Prajapati uses a very strange expression. They want to know what is Atma, the true self. And Prajapati uses this very strange expression. If I remember it right, it's something like, Atma is the I found in your eye. The I, in English that's a problem, right? The I, the letter I, found in your eye, eyeball, that eye. The I found in your eye. Of course, it's very obtuse. It's not very straight. So Indra and Prajapati think about it, and they say, yeah, that's it. In fact, according to the story, if I remember this, it's been years since I've seen that story. If I remember it right, Virochana looks into Indra's eyeball. And he's looking for the eye. And the light is shining just correctly so that that Virochana sees his own reflection in the eyeball of Indra. And he concludes, oh, eye means this, the body. I got it. And Indra, I presume, will do the same thing. Indra will look into the eyeball of Virochana and see his own body, etc., etc. So they both conclude they got it. And then Virochana goes back to the asuras and he teaches all the asuras what he learned incorrectly.
I don't see you there.
Pardon me?
I don't see you there in the picture.
Oh, thank you. Why do we have that scene? Thank you. That's the wrong, yeah, that's all of you. Thank you. Let me put, the right one is this one. Thank you. Good. So, there I am. That's good. All right. And I apologize for our online viewers, but anyway, nice to see our students gathered here. They call this an anda parampara, the blind leading the blind. So Virochana misunderstood, and he goes back and he shares his misunderstanding with all the asuras, making them even more confused and more asuric, as it were. Indra is going back to Swarga, and as he's going, he says, wait a minute, that can't be right. He turns around, he goes back to the ashram, and he studies with Prajapati for many more years, and eventually he comes to understand. So that's the point of when you see that body, whether you see it in the mirror, whether you see it reflected in somebody's eyeball, or whether you see it looking here, what you see, by definition, is not the seer. I and this, we're back to the first person and third person pronouns. Anything known to you is separate from you. Anything perceived from you is separate from you. So that's our base, is our Vedanta 101, subject and object. Anything known to you as an object is different from you. Indra understood that, Virochana obviously didn't. Okay. Continuing. Dashaha shaucha karyanam, dashaha shaucha karyanam, parivrajye nivartanam, parivrajye nivartanam, yatha jnanasya sampraptau, yatha jnanasya sampraptau, tadvajjatyari karmanam, tadvajjatyari karmanam. Just to introduce this verse a little bit, Shankara lived at a time when rituals were considered really, really important. So he has undoubtedly more concern about performing rituals than you do. In fact, most modern people and modern Hindus don't have too much concern about rituals. Shankara did, so we have to understand it from his perspective. It was a big deal in Shankara's time. And so not surprisingly, he addresses this problem again and again. May not be an issue for you, certainly is an issue for Shankara. So the issue then is, after you're enlightened, do you have to continue doing all those rituals? Of course, you're not doing the rituals now, so it doesn't make any difference. But in Shankara's time, that wasn't the case. So, do you have to do the rituals? And Shankara gives a metaphor, yukti, to show why it is that after enlightenment, you can just ignore all those rituals. He says, in the second line, parivrajye, when one literally takes to a life of wandering, when one becomes a sannyasi, when one undergoes the rituals of sannyasa and renounces all worldly life, then what happens is there is the nivartanam, the removal of what? Dasha, aha, ashaucha, karyanam. There is the removal of karya. Karya is what you're supposed to do, a responsibility, and in this case, a ritual that you're supposed to do. And what is the ritual he's referring to? The rituals concerning dasha, aha, ashaucha. The rituals concerning ashaucha, impurity, lasting dasha ahar, lasting 10 days. 10 days of impurity. So in ancient, not even in ancient times, even in modern times, that after there's been a death in the family, you're not supposed to go into that house for 10 days. Not many. Some people still follow that today. Or after there's been a birth. Of course, nowadays most births take place in hospitals. But if there's been a birth in a particular house, you're not supposed to go in to that house for 10 days. Whether or not that's practiced today is immaterial. In Shankara's time, it was a big deal. So when you become a sannyasi, you are no longer required to follow those rituals. Why? Because of renunciation, that nivartanam. You have given up all worldly connections, all worldly duties. This is the idea. So now, this is a metaphor. This is a drishtanta, and the darshtanta, what the metaphor represents, comes in the second half. So just as renouncing the world frees you from the responsibility to do all these rituals, in the same way, in the last line, tadvat, in the same way, yata, in the second line, third line, in the same way, when jnanasya sampraptao, when you gain sampraptao, when there is the acquisition, jnanasya, of self-knowledge, when you become enlightened. When you become enlightened is to get rid of ignorance. That's the point. So the first half is talking about renunciation of worldly responsibilities. The sannyasi gives up worldly responsibilities. The enlightened person gives up ignorance. And having become freed from ignorance, tadvad, in the same way, jatyadi karmanam, you have to connect it to the word nivartanam, in the same way there is a cessation of your requirement to follow all these karmas, all these rituals associated with jatyadi, jati, your caste, your varna, all these rituals that would traditionally be done, usually by males, all of these are given up. Now, the point here is that who has to do a ritual? In fact, I just hinted at it. Usually a male belonging to Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, belonging to these varnas. They have a lot of rituals they were supposed to do. But notice this definition of who has to do a ritual is associated with defined in terms of the physical body. A male of the upper three castes. Well, the enlightened person knows this is not aham or mama, and what the rules for doing rituals apply to the body. The rules for doing rituals don't apply to sat-chit-ananda atma. Sat-chit-ananda atma is male or female? Neither. Belongs to which varna? None. That's the point. So Shankara says all of this ritualism is meaningless for one who has understood that I am sat-chit-ananda atma, utterly independent of the body and mind. Next. These verses are fairly simple. Nice, we can go through a little more. Sometimes we get stuck on a verse and spend most of the class talking on one verse. These are not so much like that. Yat kamas tat kratur bhutva, yat kamas tat kratur bhuta, kritam tvajna prapadyate, kritam tvajna prapadyate, yada swatma drisha kamaha, yada swatma drisha kamaha, pramuchyante mritastada, pramuchyante mritastada. Yat kamaha tat kratuhu. This is a statement, actually, I think it's traced to the Vedic prayer. I'm not sure exactly where. But this word kratu in particular is a Vedic word, a ritualistic word, and it means your intention. Tat kratuhu. Your intention is according to yat kamaha, according to what you desire. According to what you desire is your intention. You see it, you want it. What is that bad American joke? They say the seafood diet. You see food, eat it. So this is a little bit like that statement. You see something desirable, you go for it. You have an intention to get whatever is desire. Bhutva, in this way, kritam tu agnaha, an ignorant person, kritam padyate, behaves. That person undertakes actions based on the principle, whatever you see that's desirable, as it's often said, go for it, whatever looks desirable. Of course, do you always get what you want? Okay, that's problem one. Problem two, when you see something that's really costly, and then you end up, suppose you buy a house that's too big or a car that's too expensive. You see it, you want it, and then you pay for it for the next 10, 20, 30 years. So there's a cost involved. And then we're talking about the problems associated with this attitude. See it, get it. So one problem is you can't always get it. Second problem is it's acquired at a personal cost. And the third problem is once you get it, its attractiveness tends to wear off fairly quickly. And you discover it's no big deal. It's not as wonderful as you thought it would be. So these are some of the defects with that attitude. Yat kamaha tat kratuhu. According to what you see, go and get it. But this is the attitude of an agnaha, of an ignorant person. On the other hand, yada, when, swatma drishaha, for one who is enlightened, for one who has discovered swa-atma, one's own true nature, for such a person, kamaha pramuchyante, desires pramuchyante, are removed. You become free from desire. Not really, better to say freed from raga dvesha would be more accurate. Because to say that an enlightened person is utterly, watch that word, utterly desireless. The enlightened person goes to a restaurant. Do you want tea or coffee? The enlightened person says, I have no desire. Doesn't make any difference. Come on. So the enlightened person will have a preference Maybe we can distinguish between a desire and a preference, but a preference is still kind of a desire. What's different is to have kama without raga dvesha. Remember our definition of raga, many usually translated likes and dislikes, raga dvesha, absolutely inadequate definition. A raga is a mental compulsion to chase after what you want. Dvesha is a mental compulsion to run away from what you don't want. It's compulsivity. Suppose you have a desire without being compulsive about it. Suppose you want coffee, and the person says, sorry, we don't have coffee, we have tea. Okay. That wouldn't be a problem for most people. But if it is a problem, you have a problem. And the problem is that rigidity, that compulsivity. The enlightened person, pramuchyante. They're freed, not from desire as such, but freed from that compulsivity, which means, going back to the first line, yat kamaha na tat kratuhu. Notice I'm paraphrasing here. You can have yat kamaha, you can have a desire for something, na tat kratuhu, without the intention to get it. Oh, I have to get it. That's the compulsivity. That's the source of suffering. And tada, the last word, amritaha. In this way, the person becomes amrita, literally immortal. But immortality is often used as like a code word for enlightenment. We're not talking about immortality and mortality here, so simply take it as a code word for enlightenment. That person becomes enlightened. Enlightenment, we've defined very carefully before, but people ask, how do I know when I'm enlightened? It's kind of a silly question. I shouldn't call it a silly question. It's a kind of a question that reveals some misunderstanding. That being so, enlightenment is a condition in which you are completely free from suffering. That's a very simple, direct, and correct definition. Enlightenment is a condition in which you are utterly free from suffering. Free from suffering because there's no identification with the body and mind, nor is there any compulsivity driving you into difficult worldly activities. Okay, then. Oh, good. Atma-rupa vidhe karyam, Atma-rupa vidhe karyam, kriyadibhyo nivartanam, kriyadibhyo nivartanam, nasadyam sadhanam vatma, nasadyam sadhanam vatma, nityatripta shutir mataha, nityatripta shutir mataha. Atma-rupa videhi means due to the vidhi. And vidhi here is sometimes when you're composing verses, you have to conform to the rules of the verse, certain number of, in this case, 8 syllables and a quarter, and a certain sequence of short and long syllables, leads you to sometimes choose an odd word. Vidhi here is an odd word. Fortunately, we have commentaries, and the commentator says here, vidhi, which can mean like a rule, doesn't mean a rule. It has also a lot of other meanings. Vidhi can mean karma. Did you know that? In the Mahabharata, vidhi is almost often used in the sense of karma. When you talk about vidhata, Ishvara, as karma paladata, so the word vidhi comes. But here, vidhi doesn't mean rule, doesn't mean karma. According to the commentator, it means avadharanam, ascertainment. So, atma-rupa videhe, due to the ascertainment. There's no rule about atma. So, due to the ascertainment of rupa, swarupa, the true nature of atma, when you get it, so to speak. And get it, of course, not in an academic manner. To go back to my comment before, if you're studying Vedanta, you're wasting your time. So getting it doesn't mean understanding what Vedanta says. Getting it means being personally engaged in a process of self-inquiry and discovering for yourself. That is atma rupa avadharanam, that ascertainment. Then what happens? Karyam nivartanam. What do you say in Hindi? Sab kaam ho gaya. All your work is done. There's nothing more to be accomplished in life. Kriyadi bihi, you don't have to go to the... Interesting. When you get enlightened, do you still have to go shopping for groceries? I'm just looking at this term, kuryadi bihi. Of course, Shankara had in mind rituals. So when you're enlightened, you don't have to do any rituals, as we said before. But when Shankara got enlightened, did he stop going for bhiksha, for alms? He couldn't. He'd starved to death. So when Shankara was enlightened, he continued. You go to the grocery store. Shankara doesn't go to the... He went for alms. Bhavati bhikshan dehi. You stand in front of someone's house and you ask for alms. Shankara continued to do that. So then in what sense are you karyam nivartanam? In what sense are all these activities gone? Well, in several senses. In one sense, compulsivity is gone, as we said before. Shankara can stand in front of the house, say, Bhavati bhikshan dehi, and if no one comes to the door, well, no one comes to the door. It's no problem. If you go to the market and they don't have the particular brand of ice cream that you like so much, chances are you'll go to another store. So that's quite different. You're not going to the store simply in a pragmatic way. If you're going to the store just to get food and they don't have the particular brand of ice cream you want, who cares? You get whatever they have. You're buying food. You're not buying things to satisfy your desires. What a difference. Mostly you go to the store. In fact, what do they say? They say, if you're on a diet, eat before you go to the store. Very interesting diet advice. If you go to the store and you're hungry, there can be a problem. But most people go to the store, even if they're not physically hungry, they're hungry for pleasure, so to speak, metaphorically speaking. When Shankara stands in front of someone's home and begs for alms, is he hungry for pleasure? He may be physically hungry, but he's not hungry for pleasure. It's just, the belly is empty and it needs some food. So it's just a pragmatic, again, problem and situation. It's just as if the lady doesn't come to the door, it's not a problem, it's just a situation. And what to do about that situation? Two options. Go to another home. Other possibility, put up with an empty stomach. It's not the end of the world. Anyway, this is the difference. So this is what it is when you're enlightened. You still engage in necessary activities, but your motivation has changed completely. Generally, our intent, motivation, to go back to that word kratu, our intention in life is usually to get pleasure. and to avoid pain. The enlightened person continues to do ordinary activities, but not for the sake of gaining pleasure and avoiding pain, but rather for very pragmatic reasons. Then next half actually introduces a little different topic. And we'll see this actually more in the next verse. He says, for such a person who is atma-drish, breaking that word atma-drishaha, the undeclined form atma-drik, one who has discovered one's true nature, for that person, in fact, he says more clearly, end of the third line, va, atma, for the true self, there is na sadhyam, there is nothing to be gained, na va sadhanam, nor is there any means. There's no goal, and there's no means of fulfilling that goal. This actually refers to a very profound perspective that's often misunderstood. And that is atma, two perspectives. Atma nasadhyam. Atma is not something you get or acquire. I used the word before, discover. Atma is already present, but not discovered. So, what do you have to do to discover Atma? I need to be more clear here. Atma is your true self. If I ask you, do you exist or not? You say, I exist. Are you a conscious being or not? I'm a conscious being. Who will say otherwise? No one will say otherwise. Well, that existent conscious being is Atma. That's your true self, which you know partially. You know you are a conscious being. You know you exist. But that's all you know. Do you know that your existence as a conscious being, do you know that that conscious being is unborn, uncreated, unchanging, boundaryless, limitless, full, and complete? Probably not. You know you exist as a conscious being, but you don't completely know the nature of that conscious being. Therefore, atma na sadhyam. Atma is not something you get. My Guru's words once again, you already are that which you want to become. Nice terms. You already are that. In fact, to go to the famous Mahavakya, tat tvam asi, I've pointed out in many prior classes that the verb asi is in the present tense. Tat tvam asi means you already are that. Doesn't use a future tense verb. It would be tat tvam bhavishyasi, to use a proper future form. Doesn't say that. You already are that. Tattvamasi is a statement of an already existent fact. So therefore, na sadhyam, Atma doesn't have to be acquired, and therefore he goes a step further. Na sadhanam. What is the means to get what you already have? Tell me, what should I do to get this pot? What is the means for me of acquiring this pot? I already have it. There's no sadhana. So sadhya is what you want to get. Sadhanam is a means to get. I already have the pot. What do I need to do to get the pot? I already have it. That's Shankara's point right here. Then you say, well, then what is the meaning of enlightenment? We've discussed that already. Self-recognition. You understand who you are partially. To remove the ignorance which prevents you from recognizing your true nature as it is. That is enlightenment, to gain that discovery. And Shankara gives a reference here, nitya triptaha shutehe ataha. Ataha, and this is from mataha, shutehe mataha. This is based on the mata, the understanding, shutehe, of a particular scripture which says nitya triptaha, your true nature is eternally full, complete, content. Nitya. You don't become full and complete. You are nitya triptaha. You are eternally full and complete. And this point that Shankara is making here leads to a very, very important observation. What do you have to get to become enlightened? And the answer is, it's not what you get. It's what you get rid of. You already are that which you want to be. So it's not a matter of getting something, it's a matter of removing ignorance. And the point here is ignorance something is this self-discovery something you have to do? And this is actually, let's see it'll be the last verse we see today. Let Shankara explain it to you. He'll explain it much better than I can. So let's see that. Utpadyapya vikaryani samskaryam cha kriyapalam natonyat karmana karyam karmana. It has to be karyam. It has to be a typo. Tyajetasmat sasadhanam. Tyajetasmat sasadhanam. So, what do you have to do? The very American thing, tell me what to do. I want to do something. And here, let me share with you the logic behind Shankara's statement. If I give you the logic first, then his statement will be much more clear. What do you have to, quote, do for the sake of enlightenment? And the logic, and many of you have heard this before, there's a problem with doing. And that is, whatever you do is based on finite effort, and a finite effort will have a finite result. Make sense? For a small effort, you get a small result. Big effort, big result. Is enlightenment the result of is enlightenment a big goal, a huge goal, or could we call it an infinite goal? Off the chart. I've used that expression before. And here's the point. If you, and by the way, what is that in the one Upanishad? Not coming. Mahati vinashtihi. It talks about enlightenment as being mahat, vast. And vast in the sense of infinite, off the charts. What kind of effort would be required to reach an infinite goal? In fact, some of you like science. How much energy will it take to propel a spaceship to the speed of light? And according to Professor Einstein, who used to live down the road here, the closer you come to the speed of light, the heavier the object becomes. So as you approach the speed of light, the object becomes heavier, and as it becomes heavier, it takes more energy to push. And as you approach the speed of light, then the object becomes heavier and heavier and heavier and requires more and more and more energy. And the fact is that it would take, the object would become infinite heavy and require infinite energy to reach the speed of light, which means nothing that has mass can reach the speed of light. This is what Professor Einstein taught. It's not a bad metaphor for what we're talking about. Becoming sat-chit-ananda atma, the limitless, full, complete, to become Brahman. Infinite effort. Are you ready for that? So Shankara says, fortunately, it's not a matter of effort. And he says that this, he says that to gain enlightenment doesn't require effort. Effort means action, and actions he categorizes here in a fourfold way. This is a very typical Vedantic categorization of effort. And effort can cause upadesha. You can produce something. You can produce a pot. Can you produce atma? That doesn't make sense. Another kind of effort, apya. You can gain something. You can gain this pot. I can hold this pot. Can you gain atma? You already have it, as we discussed. Then vikarya, transform. How much effort would it take to transform this pot into shards? Take some effort, right? How much effort does it take to transform sat-chit-ananda atma into sat-chit-ananda atma? Nothing. It does not a matter of transformation. Atma already is sat-chit-ananda atma. What can you do for that? You already are what you want to become. And finally, samskaryam, purification. If this pot is dirty, then you can clean it. That takes some effort. Atma is dirty. By the way, there's a funny thing. Many sannyasi names end in ananda, and then actually, I don't want to go off on a big long story. Not that funny. So let me edit that one out. Also, we're coming to the end of the class. Okay, so he said these are the four kriya phalam, the four results of effort, action. You can either produce something, utpadya, you can gain something, apya, you can transform something, vikarya, and you can purify something, samskarya, and all four of those require effort. Which of those applies to Atma? None of the above. A, B, C, D, or E. None of the above. Therefore, in line 3, ataha, therefore, na anyat karmanaha karyam. In addition to these four, na anyat, there's no other karmanaha karyam. And again, it has to be long karyam. There's no other result of an action. These are the only four. If you think about it very studiously, you won't, anything you come up with can be included in one of these fours. Therefore, tasmat, he concludes, tyajet, give up sasadhanam. Give up those efforts. The efforts are misdirected. Now, please don't misunderstand what he's saying here. Is he saying that spiritual practice, tyajet, give up your spiritual practice? No. Tell me, do these four apply to spiritual practice? Utpadya, you can produce a condition in your mind. Apya, you can reach a state of meditation. Vikarya, you can transform the way your mind works. Samskarya, you can purify your mind. All four of these definitely refer to spiritual practice, and in particular, the condition of your mind. Tremendous effort is required to prepare our minds for this discovery of your true nature as sat-chit-ananda atma. So Shankara is making a very subtle distinction. He's not saying give up all effort. He's saying discovery of your true nature requires no effort. When your effort to prepare your mind is sufficiently complete, and when you have access to these teachings, then discovery is effortless. When all the conditions are put in place, discovery is effortless. It's like when you look in the mirror, when you open your eyes, what additional, maybe you take some effort to go and stand in front of the mirror. It may take some effort to open your eyes. Then what more effort is required? When the conditions are in place, discovery is effortless. This is Shankara's conclusion. Therefore, you give up sasadhanam, you give up all those efforts to gain atma. Okay, this is a good place to conclude our class today. Om sarve bhavantu sukhinaha sarve santu niramayaha sarve bhadrani pashyantu ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityor ma amritangamaya. Om shanti shanti shanti. Om tat sat.